Jake had been traveling for weeks, his mind set on leaving behind a life filled with hard memories. The open plains of the West stretched before him like an endless sea. He had known many struggles in his life, but this journey was different. He was searching for something, maybe peace, maybe a fresh start, or maybe just a place to call home. The wild frontier offered him a chance to rebuild, away from the world that had never seemed to understand him. He had ridden alone for so long that the idea of being around others was uncomfortable. But the small town he arrived at seemed like a good place to rest, even if it was just for a little while. The town was quiet, almost too quiet. The wooden buildings lined the dusty streets, and the sounds of wagon wheels and horses' hooves were replaced by the distant calls of hawks. Jake could sense that this town had seen better days. Yet, there was something about it that made him feel as though it could be the place to start over. With a few coins in his pocket and his horse by his side, he strolled down the main street looking for a place to eat or perhaps a place to sleep for the night. It was in the saloon that he first noticed her. She wasn't like the other women in the town. The others were either busy with their own lives or too busy gossiping to pay attention to a stranger like Jake. But this woman, her name was Ayanna, sat alone at a corner table. Her eyes, deep and unreadable, seemed to look beyond the walls of the saloon. Her hair was long and dark, a striking contrast to the bright red dress she wore. She was a vision, but there was something about her that set her apart from the others. It wasn't just her beauty, it was her presence. There was a quiet strength in her that made Jake pause. Jake wasn't one to get involved in the lives of others. He had learned long ago that it was easier to stay to himself. But as he stood there staring at her, something inside of him stirred. He couldn't shake the feeling that she needed help, that she was different from the others. It wasn't just the way she looked. It was something deeper. Her sadness seemed to seep from her, hidden beneath the surface but impossible to ignore. Without thinking, Jake made his way over to the bar, his boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. He ordered a drink, his mind racing with thoughts of how to approach the woman at the corner. But before he could make a move, the trouble started. A loud voice interrupted his thoughts. One of the men at a nearby table, clearly drunk, had spotted Ayanna. He stood up, stumbling slightly, and walked over to her. Jake could see the situation unfolding before it even had a chance to escalate. The man grabbed Ayanna's arm roughly, pulling her towards him. Her face twisted with discomfort as she tried to pull away. But the man's grip tightened. Without thinking, Jake crossed the room in 2 long strides. He had always been quick to act when he saw someone in need. As he reached the man, he grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back with a force that made the man grunt in pain. "Let go of her," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. The man tried to pull away, but Jake's grip was too strong. Ayanna's eyes met Jake's, a mixture of relief and confusion crossing her face. She didn't know this man, yet here he was coming to her rescue. The man grumbled, clearly no match for Jake. But when he saw the fire in Jake's eyes, he seemed to think better of continuing. He let go of Ayanna and stumbled away, grumbling insults under his breath. Ayanna stood there, her body still tense from the encounter. She looked up at Jake, her eyes scanning him briefly before she spoke. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. Jake nodded, not sure of what to say. He had never been good with words, especially when it came to women. His life had been filled with horses, cattle, and the open range, not with the kind of conversations that made men like him comfortable. But something about Ayanna made him want to stay, to do more than just walk away. "I wasn't looking for any trouble," Jake said, taking a step back. He didn't want to seem too eager, but he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. Ayanna gave him a faint smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "No one is," she replied. She looked down at the table, her fingers fidgeting with the edges of her drink. Jake watched her for a moment, his heart aching for her in a way he couldn't explain. There was something about her sadness that mirrored his own, a deep ache that only the wilds of the West could understand. For a moment, they both sat in silence, neither knowing exactly what to say next. "Do you need anything?" Jake asked after a long pause. It was a simple question, but it felt important. He wasn't sure why, but he wanted to help her, even if it was just for a moment. Ayanna shook her head slowly, her expression distant. "I'm fine," she said, but Jake could hear the lie in her voice. There was so much more beneath the surface, and he had a feeling she wasn't about to share it with anyone, especially not him. Still, the connection between them was undeniable. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Jake stayed in the saloon for a while longer, nursing his drink and stealing occasional glances at Ayanna, who seemed lost in her thoughts. When he finally decided to leave, he noticed she was still sitting at the same table, her gaze fixed on the far wall. As Jake stepped out into the cool night air, he couldn't help but feel as though he was leaving something behind. He knew that this wasn't the end of the story, that there was something more waiting for him and Ayanna, whether he was ready for it or not. He had been trying to escape his past, but maybe, just maybe, it was in this quiet little town that he would find what he had been searching for all along. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was destined to cross paths with Ayanna again. He didn't know what that would look like, but he couldn't deny the pull between them. He had already risked his soul to protect her once, and something told him that it wouldn't be the last time. The days that followed were quiet, but Jake couldn't get Ayanna out of his mind. The image of her sitting alone in the saloon, her eyes distant and sad, haunted him. He had seen so many people in his life, some good, some bad, but none had struck him like Ayanna had. There was a softness in her that he hadn't expected, yet a fierceness in her spirit that made her unbreakable. It was clear that she had faced more hardships than anyone should ever endure. Jake knew that whatever pain she carried, she didn't show it easily. Over the next few days, Jake found himself seeking out Ayanna whenever he could. He had a reason to stop by the saloon more often than necessary, and it was there that their connection slowly began to deepen. It wasn't anything dramatic, just quiet moments where words were few but the understanding between them grew. Ayanna was not one to open up easily. She had built walls around herself, keeping people at a distance, perhaps because she feared being hurt again. She was a woman who had been through a lot: captivity, loss, and a life filled with pain that no one should ever experience. And yet, despite all of that, there was still a fire inside her that refused to go out. It was a quiet strength, one that only a few people had the privilege to see. Jake watched her from a distance, trying to respect the space she seemed to need. He didn't want to push her into talking about things she wasn't ready to share. But every time their paths crossed, she seemed to soften just a little bit more. There was an unspoken understanding between them, as though they both knew that their meeting wasn't just a coincidence. One afternoon, Jake decided to try something different. Instead of waiting for Ayanna to come to him, he decided to seek her out. He had heard from the bartender that she often spent her afternoons by the river, where she could be alone. The idea of finding her there, away from the prying eyes of the town, felt like the right thing to do. Jake saddled his horse and rode out towards the river, his thoughts on Ayanna. He didn't know what he planned to say to her, but he knew that he couldn't just let things remain the way they were. He wanted to know more about her, to understand the woman behind the mystery. When he arrived at the river, he saw her sitting by the water's edge, her gaze fixed on the flowing stream. Her long, dark hair blew gently in the wind, and for a moment, Jake stood quietly watching her. There was something peaceful about the scene, something raw and real about her connection with the land around her. It was as though she belonged to this place, as though the river had become her sanctuary. Jake dismounted his horse and slowly walked towards her. He didn't want to startle her, so he made sure to approach quietly. Ayanna didn't seem to notice him until he was only a few feet away. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Jake said softly, stopping at a respectful distance. "I just thought I'd see if you were all right." Ayanna's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she finally nodded. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice calm but distant. There was a hesitation in her words, as though she was unsure whether she should say more. Jake sat down beside her, but not too close. He respected her space, understanding that she wasn't ready to share everything. Instead of pressing her, he sat in silence, letting the peaceful sounds of the river fill the air around them. They both watched the water flow, its rhythmic movement a calming presence. It was Ayanna who broke the silence first. "You don't have to sit here with me," she said quietly. "I'm not used to company." Jake turned to face her, his expression gentle. "I don't mind," he replied. "I don't have anywhere else to be, and I'd rather be here with you than anywhere else." She didn't look at him immediately, but instead stared at the water, her fingers grazing the grass beside her. "Why do you keep coming around?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Jake thought about her question carefully. It wasn't something he had expected to hear, but it was honest. He had his reasons, but they were hard to explain, even to himself. I don't know, he said after a long pause. Something about you. It's hard to explain. There's just something in the way you carry yourself, something in your eyes. I see a strength in you even if you don't see it yourself. Ayana's gaze flickered to him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. She didn't find any. She looked away quickly, a faint blush creeping onto her cheeks. I'm not strong, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I've been broken for too long. Jake reached out and gently placed his hand on hers, his touch comforting and steady. You may not see it now, but I see it. You've been through a lot, but you're still standing. That's something. Ayana's lips parted as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Instead, she just stared at their hands, the touch of his hand offering her a rare moment of comfort. It was strange for her. She had never allowed anyone to get this close, never trusted anyone enough to let them see the real her. But Jake was different. He wasn't trying to fix her or change her. He just wanted to be there, to listen, to understand. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was as if the world had fallen away, leaving only the two of them by the river. Jake's presence was like a shield, protecting her from the weight of her own thoughts, from the things she feared would define her forever. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Ayana spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't know what I've been through, she said. You don't know the things I've seen, the things I've lost. Jake didn't flinch. He had seen pain too, just in different forms. No, I don't, he admitted. But I don't need to know everything. What I do know is that you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Ayana turned to face him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of judgment. But all she found was sincerity. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. Maybe she didn't have to carry all the weight alone. I don't know if I can believe that yet, she said softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Jake smiled gently. You don't have to, but I'll be here no matter what. The river continued to flow steady and unchanging, just like the promise in Jake's words. Ayana felt something shift inside her, a quiet surrender to the kindness she had never known could exist. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that healing wasn't impossible. They sat there for hours, talking and listening, sharing pieces of themselves without saying much at all. It was enough. It would always be enough.